Thank you for taking the time to hear the stories of climate survivors today. My name is Quentin Scott. I'm the Federal Policy Director at Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone, if you need closed captioning, you can enable that feature on Zoom by going to the three dots on the far right corner where it says more. When you click that, it'll have, you want to choose captions, and that'll turn on closed captioning for you. Yeah. So we're gathered here today virtually because climate survivors from across the nation are demanding fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil be held accountable for the damages they have knowingly caused. Families have been left displaced, small businesses have been shuttered, towns and cities across America will never be the same, and people are dying. Today, you'll hear the personal stories of climate survivors and their fight to bring justice to the fossil fuel industry that lied to all of us for decades. Last month, the Senate Budget Committee detailed how the fossil fuel companies used their power and influence for decades to delay governments and consumers from making informed decisions to protect our climate so the fossil fuel industry could protect their profits. Even as evidence is undeniable now, fossil fuel companies continue to muddy the waters, and we, the public, pay the price. In 2015, 196 countries joined the Paris Agreement, committing to restrict global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Less than a decade later, 2023 became the warmest year on record with temporary breaches of that 1.5 degrees. Scientists warn us that these temporary breaches are clear and alarming signs of accelerating climate change. In 2024 is already showing signs of being the newest, warmest year on record. And if it's not, it's a 99% chance it'll be the second highest, only behind 2023. Unfortunately, this means there will be new and repeat climate survivors in the coming weeks, months, and years as extreme weather events increase. But there is hope. More and more organizations like Public Citizens, Extreme Weather Survivors, Center for Climate Integrity, and Chesapeake Climate Action Network are standing in solidarity with climate survivors demanding justice and accountability. Americans from Hawaii to Vermont are pushing relentlessly, using all the tools at their disposal. We've already seen over 30 climate civil lawsuits. Vermont passed a climate superfund bill to hold fossil fuel companies accountable, with 4 other states pursuing the same effort. U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen will be introducing a polluters pay bill to do the same at the national level. And a new legal theory on how to hold companies accountable has been proposed and is circulating amongst legal experts. Making climate survivors and their communities whole again is at the center of our work, and we're in it for the long haul. First up, I would like to introduce Roshetta Ozane from Louisiana, and she is the founder and director and chief executive officer of the Vessel Project of Louisiana, and is a survivor of Hurricane Rita in 2005, Hurricane Laura in Delta in 2020, Winter Storm Uri in 2021, a great flood in 2021, tornadoes and industrial pollution. Rosetta is also the Gulf Fossil Finance Coordinator with the Texas Campaign for Environmental Fund. She champions for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, advocating for their right to clean air, clean water, sustainable communities that are not burdened by fossil fuel build-out. Roshetta, thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As he stated, I'm Roshetta Sibley Ozane. What he did not mention is that I'm also a mom of 6 and a grandmother of 1. I live in a small town in Louisiana called Sulphur. Sulphur, just as it sounds, it smells like sulfur, it smells like rotten eggs. We smell chemicals all the time. But as many of you know, Louisiana's climate is prone to extreme weather events, particularly hurricanes, which bring devastating storms, heavy rainfall, and flooding that test our resilience every single day. Not only that, but we're dealing with rising sea level and coastal erosion. In 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, we also had 2 major hurricanes to hit in Southwest Louisiana, Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta. Myself and my 6 children were displaced because of these hurricanes. We found ourselves homeless, living in from hotel to hotel, and at one point in my vehicle, not knowing where we were going to stay the night. We were eventually placed in a 3-bedroom FEMA trailer. We stayed in that FEMA trailer for almost 2 years. During this time, there were other people in my community who needed assistance, who did not have the funding to provide themselves with safe shelter during a time where they didn't know they were going to be homeless, where they didn't know they weren't going to have food to feed their children. This is when I started the Vessel Project of Louisiana in 2020, not knowing that a few short weeks after that, we would be dealing with another major storm, Hurricane Delta. So Hurricanes Laura and Delta were only 6 weeks apart. People who didn't lose everything during Hurricane Laura lost everything during Hurricane Delta. This displaced more people. We had newly homeless. We had people who had never had to reach out for assistance before. They were scraping and scrapping, looking for ways to feed their children and ways to help their families survive. This is when we recognized that our community of Southwest Louisiana was a resource desert. There were not the proper resources in place for the abundance of people who now needed assistance. We reached out to agencies like FEMA, who only gave pennies to those of us who were not homeowners. All of this must stop. The agencies in place did not help those of us that were not white and wealthy. During this time, as Vessel Project was developing and I was continuing to help those families in need while being in need myself, there were also chemical explosions that were happening at the local facilities. But because we were in a shelter in place, the people who could not leave the community had to stay there in the presence of those chemical releases. We started connecting the dots and we looked at industrial pollution and how industrial pollution leads to the intensity of these hurricanes and storms that we were seeing in Southwest Louisiana and the way that they were coming back to back to back. A couple months after that, in February of 2021, we were hit with yet another devastating storm, Winter Storm Uri, that froze states like Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So those of us who were still trying to recover from 2 major hurricanes, now we found ourselves recovering from a winter freeze that left many without power or water for almost a week or more. When is enough going to be enough? When are we going to stop polluting these communities? These polluting facilities are releasing dangerous chemicals like methane and benzene into the air. These chemicals are warming our climate. The greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from these facilities are causing these climate-induced disasters. The climate-induced disasters are displacing people and families. We're climate survivors not because we want to be, because we have to be. And many times we hear the question of why don't you leave the community? This is our home. This is where we are from. This is where my children were born and raised. This is where their friends are, their families are. This is where their ancestors have died. We don't have to leave. There's another side of Louisiana that many don't see because many times when you hear about Louisiana, it's because of all of the storms that happen. The other side of Louisiana is that it is beautiful. It is sportsman's paradise. It is where 90% of the world's seafood come from the Gulf Coast. It is where you get music and culture, things like Zydeco, Mardi Gras parade, festivals, and carnivals. People come here to vacation, but we get to live here. We're going to continue to fight for our home. We shouldn't have to pay the price because of these storms that are constantly devastating our community, causing us to have to pick up and move. We are also seeing higher prices when it comes to paying our insurance. We're seeing higher prices when we're paying our electricity bill, our gas bills. That is unfair to us. It is high time that these polluters pay if they're going to continue to come to our communities and pollute our air and our water and cause these climate-induced disasters to increase. They need to pay the price. And I'm not talking about the pennies that they pay when they have an explosion or a chemical leak. Those are pennies to them. I'm saying they need to mitigate what they've done. They need to make it better. It is high time that our government officials make these polluters pay. Polluters like Chevron, polluters like Citgo, polluters like Venture Global, Cheniere, Shell, they need to pay. When I walk out my back door, I can see over 14 petrochemical and other chemical polluting facilities. That's not right. But yet, when I go to the whiter, wealthier side of town, you don't see the same image. We have been made a sacrifice because of our skin color, because we are Black, brown, indigenous, because we have low income. We're being treated less than, and enough is enough. We're calling on all of those elected officials to stand on the side of people, stand on the side of what's right, stand on the side of equity, stand on the side of justice. Make these polluters pay. Stop approving new fossil fuel infrastructure in our communities. It is time that we rebuild communities sustainably and resiliently so that we don't have to continue to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps. No one wakes up in the morning wanting to be resilient. We're resilient because we have to be. And it's time out. Thank you all so much for having me today. And there is so much more I can say. I'm sure you have my contact information. I look forward to speaking with you and answering your questions later.
Thank you, Rasheda. Next, I would like to bring up Jenny Sibold from Vermont, who owns Rebel Heart Collective, a Montpelier business severely damaged when the Winooski River flooded in July 2023. Jenny has lived in Vermont for over 22 years and opened her business, which sells home goods, clothing, books, and jewelry 5 years ago. Jenny is a single mother of 3 and suffered more than $60,000 in damage due to the flooding, and her store was closed for more than 6 months while flood damage was repaired. Jenny, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an emotional morning in my world. I'm Jenny Sibold, single mom of 3 kids. I live in Montpelier. I've lived here for over 20 years. And I started a business about 6 years ago with a lot of optimism and hope, and some beautiful clothing store that I put my whole heart and soul into renovating. And then a little while back, I bought a flower shop and moved that into my business. So I can have clothes and flowers, and I love what I do, and I love being a part of my community. Last year, July 2024, July 11th, which is the same day that I founded my company, ironically, is the same day that the flood came through and filled up the shop and all of Montpelier. My shop was only 4 feet high. Some of the other shops were 7, 8, 9 feet high, worth of floodwaters that came through. And it was devastating. And I'm still rebuilding. It's not stopped. It's hard. Every day I wake up and try to be as optimistic as possible to go forward. This is the way that I support my family. It's my sole income. My shops were closed for over 7 months. We just reopened in February in a very limited capacity. And there was no, there's not a lot of money. FEMA doesn't help businesses. There's limited grants. Thank goodness I have some family support, because everything could have just fallen apart for me. I could have lost even more than I did. During those 7 months, I had to support my 2 kids who live with me, and one of them was launching off into the world, and I had to often wake up in the morning and decide, like, am I going to feed myself today, or am I going to send my kid off to pursue his dream? And he's worked so hard for his whole, young adult life. And so oftentimes I would have an empty belly just to help him do what he needed to do. And it hasn't stopped. I'm open, but the economic liveliness has not returned to our town. Floodwaters don't just like go away and then you just like dry things out. There was record temperatures after that. So then it was hot and everything had to get taken out. Otherwise it would mold. It's mind-boggling. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. I had no idea. I would watch these communities like Louisiana go through flooding or hurricanes. I had no comprehension what the actual impact is. It's gross. There's, not to mention, it was class 4 floodwaters. So there was who knows what in the water. And we're just doing what we can as a community, banding together, getting it all out. But we had rashes and people had stomach bugs. People still have issues, health issues from exposure to all that. And yeah, it just continues to be really hard. And it feels like these communities we're like the band on the Titanic. Nobody wants to fix the ship that's going down, but they want all of these people to like just keep playing the music and bear the brunt. People keep saying to me, you didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't ask for a flood. None of us asked for this, but I feel like I did do something wrong. And just like, why can't I rebuild? Why can't I, I'm still like applying for food stamps and like trying to just make ends meet. And yeah, and I'm just one person who has this story, and I don't know. I just, it's unfair. It's unfair that it's all pushed onto the people, like the speaker before said. I'm not a survivor because I want to be. It's the only option. I have no other option. I have to continue moving on for my family and for a community that I really hold dear. And yeah, that's my story. I'm trying to be optimistic and move ahead, and but there are good days and there are bad days, and I'm wealthy in optimism most days. So thanks for hearing me.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a very moving story. Really appreciate you sharing.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Deborah Parker and her granddaughter, Patrice Parker, from Arizona. Deborah is a retired nurse, has lived in Arizona since 1982. Her granddaughter, Patrice Parker, is 18 years old and a student and part-time cashier who spent her entire life in Arizona. Patrice has diabetes and asthma, making it incredibly scary to live through a deadly heat in Arizona. They can't leave the house at all when it gets into the high triple digits. The bills are astronomical because the high temperatures don't even come down at night. So they have to keep the AC on nonstop, starting to need it earlier and earlier every year. Deborah and Patrice, we look forward to hearing from you both.
My name is Patrice Parker. I am 18 and have many medical issues. As the weather gets hotter, I experience terrible flare-ups because of the excessive heat, and every year it gets worse. I have increased pain in my bones, joints, and muscles. My migraines are worse and more often. My fatigue and complete exhaustion, high heart rate, anxiety, and depression are always worse when it's summer because of the heat. The hot air makes it hard for me to breathe with my asthma. Think of standing in front of an oven when you open the doors and trying to take a deep breath. It hurts my lungs. My POTS worsens with increased heart rate, and I am dizzier, even drinking extra fluids. Because of the heat, I avoid going out during the day if possible, because even a little exercise in the heat makes me feel terrible. I think about the outside temperatures when scheduling doctor's appointments and try to go early in the day when it is cooler. I can't walk outside unless it's in the evening and when it's dark, but even then, it can be above 100 degrees at night. When it's over 110 outside, my depression worsens because I'm stuck inside. When we do go out during the summer, it takes time for the car to cool. The heat increases my heart rate. Even walking through the parking lot can be difficult due to the high temperatures and effects on my body. I work in retail and management doesn't let me deliver orders outside because it's not safe for me because of the heat. Just a few steps outside in the heat, my heart rate can rise above 160 easily. It's scary for me because it's getting hotter every year and the challenges I face are getting harder with every summer.
Thank you, Patrice. My name is Deborah Parker. I've lived in Arizona since 1982 when I moved here as a new RN. I've raised my family here, and although it's been hot back then, it's so much worse now. My daughter has chronic medical issues, and we have to be very aware when scheduling appointments or going out during the summer. We rarely wear shorts because the seats will burn the back of your legs. The metal on the seatbelt latch will burn your skin when it makes contact with you. The steering wheel is so hot, you need to have a cover or wear gloves, otherwise you risk burning your hands. Always, always have ice water, multiple bottles, because if you break down in your car, you have to have a plan to keep cool until assistance arrives. I'm getting older and I walk extra carefully when I'm in parking lots, because if you fall, the asphalt will burn your skin almost immediately. I use ice packs in the grandkids' car seats to prevent burns and pre-cool the car. When my other kids were little, I didn't worry about the extreme heat. Yeah, it was hot and I was careful, but this is so much worse. As we navigate our daily lives during summer, life slows down drastically. The heat makes every muscle and bone feel like it's on fire when you have chronic illnesses. Cardiac symptoms are exacerbated because of the increased heat. Migraines are more intense and frequent. Yes, almost everything is air conditioned, but the time it takes to cool the car before and after the drive and the walk through the parking lot is challenging when you have chronic medical issues compounded by the excessive heat. I can feel the heat from the parking lot through my shoes as I walk. You learn not to stop too long. We are still in the first week of June, and starting at the end of last month, I have received almost daily excessive heat warning alerts through my phone. We are driving to Phoenix today, and it's estimated and forecasted that it'll be 113. This is still the first week of June. This is crazy. You know, the joke is Arizona's heat is a dry heat. Sure. You know, envision standing in front of your oven and trying to take deep breaths and continue breathing as that heat's in your face. It's difficult. It's hard to carry on your usual activities. The increased heat affects my power bill as well. In the winter, I spend about $30 to $60 a month just to keep the house warm. In the summer, the bill easily exceeds $300, $400, and that's keeping the house at 79 degrees. It's not comfortable, but it's bearable. It's better than being outside. You know, every time the air conditioning kicks on, I think about the bill and just realize it's just going up and up every day. And I'm disabled and on a fixed income. The power bills are another stressor added to the challenges we already have. The high bills used to be just in August and September, but now it's June through October. There's just no relief from it. Day-to-day life has been altered and it's becoming so much worse. The future terrifies me. The oil and gas companies need to be held accountable. They have made record profits polluting our world as they knowingly cause climate change, and we pay the price every day as we suffer through the heat. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice and Deborah. Our next speaker is Alan Myers from California. He was born and raised in Paradise, California, as a third-generation member of the Ridge community. After gaining a global perspective by traveling the world and documenting stories through his art project, Nomad Site, he returned to focus on his hometown. As a founding member and former executive director of Regenerating Paradise, Alan has been instrumental in leading community-led recovery efforts post-2018 Campfire. His short film, A Message from the Future of Paradise, serves as a guiding vision for the community of Paradise, an example of other communities rebuilding from disasters. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Quentin. And thank you everybody for being here. As I've heard, we are part of a group that we didn't necessarily sign up for. There are climate survivors around the country and around the world. I grew up in Paradise. My mom grew up in Paradise, a little sleepy mountain town of 28,000 in the foothills of the Sierras. And as a kid, we were certain that Halloween would get rained out. That was always a joke. We'd want to go, but we'd get rain. Well, on November 8th of 2018, there hadn't been any measurable rainfall for over 200 days. It was record low humidity, record high red flag wind event, and a spark from a mismanaged utility company, PG&E. Now, they may have been the spark, but the conditions were set long before by the fossil fuel industry, which created the conditions, which created the climate crisis. Hot, dry, windy conditions that took that spark and made it into the most costly disaster in the world for 2018. Billions of dollars in damages. PG&E pleaded guilty to 85 counts of manslaughter. Now, I'm curious about the other actors. PG&E might have been standing there with the match, but it was the fossil fuel industry that threw fuel on the fire. I lost my family's home, every home I ever played in as a kid, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, are all gone. There has been an erasure of my identity and my community's identity. Things that we would look for that would remind us of who we are and where we come from are gone. This is what is left of my family's home. This is a jar of ashes. Home that I grew up in, home that I stood next to my mom as she passed away when I was 11. This is our culture and our identity that's been reduced to ashes. There are campfire survivors in every state in the country. These are climate refugees displaced within the United States. My parents were unable to rebuild. My stepmom now suffers from Parkinson's and post-traumatic stress disorder. My dad is a full-time caregiver. I still have friends that are living in garages, temporary living conditions, being bounced around, living out of their cars because they are unable to rebuild and have not found their feet. Now, PG&E has paid out for their lawsuit, but what about the role of the fossil fuel industry? They are absolutely in part responsible for this disaster and should be held accountable. And that's why we're here today, to make sure that our stories are heard and that they are made to be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to acknowledge that we're going to take a few questions from the audience. So you can either drop that in the Q&A function, or when we get to that portion of the presentation, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you to ask your question of our speakers today. But moving on, our next speaker is Aaron Rogenberg, is a senior policy counsel with Public Citizens Climate Program, where he is focused on accountability for crimes of the climate crisis.
Thanks, Quentin. It's an honor to be here with these other speakers and to hear their stories. As Quentin said, I'm a senior policy counsel with Public Citizen, and I'm just here to help us close out because as has been stated by all of our speakers, the disasters that have endangered Patrice and Deborah and Jenny and Rashida and Alan, that have destroyed homes and ruined livelihoods and taken lives in communities all across the country. These disasters didn't just happen out of the blue, right? They were foreseeable and in fact foreseen consequences of decisions made by a small number of fossil fuel companies that knowingly generated a substantial portion of all global greenhouse gas emissions and fraudulently deceived the public so they could continue to generate emissions and heat up the planet. In other words, these are not just tragedies that we're hearing about today. These are harms that were forced on innocent people by sophisticated corporate actors that were aware of and consciously disregarded how their conduct would result in exactly the kinds of injuries that we've heard about today. And let's be clear, if any of us on this call had engaged in knowing or reckless conduct that led to Alan's home getting burned down, or Jenny's business getting destroyed, or the endangerment of Patrice's health, you can bet that we would face consequences for our misbehavior, right? Whether through civil litigation or criminal prosecution or other public programs. And we're here to say that those principles legally apply to big oil companies in the exact same way. The victims and survivors of climate disasters deserve justice and accountability. And fortunately, we have mechanisms to give it to them, right? We have new legislative proposals like the climate superfund bills that have been introduced in a number of states, one of which was just signed into law in Vermont. We have the civil justice system, which is designed to repair harms and compensate those who have been injured. And that's precisely the goal of the dozens of climate accountability suits that have been filed by local and state jurisdictions all across the country, seeking damages and other forms of relief, like consumer protection measures to stop big oil from continuing to lie. And we also have the criminal justice system, which is designed to protect citizens from harm and hold wrongdoers accountable. And Public Citizen, along with a growing network of former prosecutors and other legal advocates, believe that a strong case exists that major fossil fuel companies have committed crimes like reckless endangerment for contributing to climate disasters, like criminal destruction of property for climate losses, like fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering for deceiving the public, and like reckless homicide for causing climate-related deaths. So as we head now into another summer of lethal heat waves and wildfires and hurricanes and other climate-fueled catastrophes, we think it's really important to remember every time a disaster strikes that we have solutions that can provide climate survivors with restitution and accountability from the actors responsible. It is just a matter of whether or not we're willing to stand up and fight for the justice that these victims need and deserve.
Thank you, Aaron. Now our final speaker, Chris Coker, is the co-founder and co-executive director with Extreme Weather Survivors, an organization bringing together survivors of floods, fires, droughts, extreme heat, deadly air pollution, and superstorms. The organization aims to build a nationwide community providing support, space to learn from one another, and to do everything they can to stop these disasters from devastating more and more families. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. And first, I just want to say thank you to the speakers who share their stories. It was really moving, and I'm really honored, like everyone, to be here. We're a new nationwide community of people directly impacted by these disasters. And I want to talk a little bit about the services we provide. We provide no-cost, trauma-informed resources and programming in English and Spanish. We connect interested survivors to advocacy opportunities for them to share their stories and be part of the fight to slow climate change. But when we talk to folks, and when we've talked to folks around the country, the thing that we hear over and over and over again is a couple things. Number one, we hear from folks that climate change is about people. About 9 in 10 Americans say they've already been harmed by extreme weather. It's now. This is not something that this is not just something that our kids will be dealing with in the next decade. This is something that we are facing right now in communities around the country. And it's not natural. Words matter, and we need to name these disasters what they actually are. There's a disproportionate impact on people of color, on immigrant communities, and people with disabilities. And let's not forget, like we heard today on the call, the impact on small business owners and first responders like firefighters and parents who are dealing with a new reality of parenting through extreme heat. So the resources that we offer, we provide support groups in Spanish and English. We build online communities for people to connect and learn with each other and share their experiences of how they've lived through and survived these disasters. And we offer special webinars with a network of mental health experts to talk about what it means to survive these extreme weather disasters. And for example, to help parents provide support to their kids who are spending more and more time indoors. We also support people who are interested, like you're hearing today, in sharing their stories to help more Americans understand the reality of how climate is changing and to be part of the fight for stronger policies to make sure that no family has to experience what Jenny and Deborah and Patrice and everyone on this call is living with. If you'd like to learn more, you can join us and sign up to learn more and be part of the resources and the programs at www.extremeweathersurvivors.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We are now at a portion of the program where we are going to take audience questions. So you can either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or if you don't want to ask your question, you can drop it into the Q&A function. So I have one question that I'll throw it out to our entire sort of panel here. This is a press conference directed to media members. Can each of you maybe take a few moments to express what role the media plays in making sure that we hold these companies accountable and how we can tell these stories of survivors and start beginning to, put pressure on our elected officials and do that through the media?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first with that question. The media plays a vital and crucial role here because that is how our stories get told. That is how these stories get connected. Because I can recall being in a meeting with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, aka FERC, and we were talking about the things that happen here in Southwest Louisiana as it relates to the fossil fuel industry and why they should not be approving permits. And I remember the now chairman of FERC saying to us as frontline people from this community that it was going to take something major to happen before they would consider not approving these permits. And the reason he had the audacity to say that is because they look at each of these incidents separately. Something major has happened to each of our communities, but collectively, something major has happened in the United States that directly impacts what's happening in the global South. The things that are being exported from my community are traveling across the waterways and going to communities in Africa, communities in Asia, communities in Europe. We are impacting the entire world. Something major has happened. Explosion after explosion, chemical release after chemical release, tornadoes, droughts, hurricanes, floods. Those are all major. And we're going to need the media to tell this collective story so that they don't have the audacity to look us in our face and tell us that something major has to happen when we are seeing major things happening every day. We also need the media because we know that the oil and gas industry, they have the money. They can put whatever story they want to put out. But we need people to tell our story. We need people to come and record us, listen to us, publish our stories, because storytelling is very important in this moment. And it's not going to work if we don't have the media here.
Thank you, Rasheda. Does anyone else want to add to that? Jenny, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, and to just not treat every disaster as a 30-second clip. It takes years for each of these communities to rebuild, and they just kind of come in and get the big shot and then leave. They're not really carrying through and following up on the actual story. These things don't just take a couple days. The impact is forever. So I think the media staying in contact and just continuing to cover the story, even if it's not sensational or, tragic enough in that moment. I think that's important too.
And I'll just add, I think centering people's stories in each of these, the conversation, the media, I think helping more Americans, like Jenny said, helping more people understand what the reality of living through these disasters is, and helping more Americans, understand that when you hear about a wildfire, when you hear about a flood, you're actually hearing about people and the impact on their lives.
Patrice and Deborah.
Sorry about that. I think one of the major things, kind of like Chris said, is it's important to remember the humanity part of it, the human story, the personal stories. It's not just the quick, grab your attention news story. It's remembering that people's lives are affected and people's lives are changed, and really focus on that part of it. Thank you.
So another question I would like to sort of really direct towards our survivors. So each of you kind of experience these tragedies as individuals, but you have come to sort of recognize that you're not alone. Has it been comforting to sort of like come together and find others, other survivors, and like how does that sort of play into your experience? Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I just met you folks a few days ago, and each of your stories has already impacted me greatly, and I feel yeah, being able to connect and share each of our things that we are surviving and enduring is very different. In terms of flood, water, fire, heat, etc. But the general sort of baseline of trauma that surrounds those events and experiencing them, I don't know. I just feel like I can feel a hum of connection between each of these people, even though I've never met you in real life. So it helps me feel less like I'm screaming in the bottom of a well to nobody else. It's like there are collective other voices screaming in this well together. Yeah, thanks.
Rashida?
I, as a Black woman from the South, a lot of times I'm in room where I'm the only Black person, the only woman, sometimes the only Black woman in the room whenever I'm fighting here in the state of Louisiana. We know this state is run by a bunch of, white older men. And so to be in community with people who might not necessarily look like me, but are fighting the same fight that I'm fighting across the world, it gives me hope that even though here in Louisiana, a lot of times we feel like we're fighting a losing battle. I don't know if you all have been keeping up with our new governor, just trying to survive in this state and then having to take the fight from Louisiana to the federal level to ensure that our state is following federal guidelines. So, again, oftentimes I feel alone, but it's events like this, it's coalitions, it's people coming together telling their stories, and the stories being so similar and how people are impacted. Because one thing I've always said is that we can't separate air and water. So if my water and my air is polluted here in Louisiana, if the water along the Gulf Coast is polluted, then it's polluted in your community as well. You are just as impacted as I am. And the only way we're going to win this is together. So things like this bringing us together, it gives me hope. It brings me joy to hear people talk about what they are fighting for, because so often we're fighting against something. We're trying to stop something. But what are we fighting for? What are we trying to start? What are we trying to build? And I think that hope and those things come together when we're all together.
Alan?
Yeah, I mean, this is truly a David versus Goliath story. The oil and gas industry have been collaborating and colluding for decades. They have billions, trillions of dollars behind them to try and bury the science that we all know, to protect the wealth that they have. And the reality is they aren't going to feel the loss like we are. If they lose a vacation home in the Bahamas, who cares? If they lose their ski chalet in Tahoe, who cares? They have billions of dollars that will always shield them from the devastating consequences of the climate crisis. It's upon us who are feeling it every day to come together in a coalition, as Rashida said, and fight this. And that's what we're doing. You know, from California to Vermont to Arizona to the Gulf, we are feeling the loss. And it's upon us to have our voices heard, to fight against this Goliath that has inflicted this loss upon us.
Thank you, Ellen. Patrice or Deborah, you want to wrap us up here?
Yes,
don't
I think it's really important that we do come together as a group, because when you're going through your daily struggles and frustrations, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you forget that there's a community out there that can support you. And just knowing that there's this group and there are people that are going through similar issues, I think is really important, and it makes me feel hopeful, and it makes me feel less alone, like I'm screaming into the darkness by myself.
Thank you. If any media member wants to ask further follow-up questions or get more context to anything that our speakers have said here today, please reach out to Patrick Davis at Public Citizens or Ariel Casale at Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I believe most of the media members have those individual contact information already, and they'll connect you with our speakers. Thank you again to all our survivors for sharing your moving and impactful stories. This is just the beginning. We're going to be here all summer, all year until this fight is won. So it's going to take a collective effort. As Ellen said, this is David versus Goliath. And so we're going to hold them accountable for their deception. And I strongly encourage media members to tell these stories and other similar stories as the summer of heat ramps up, because your voices and your platforms are going to be really important as well. Thank you, and we'll be in touch.